we have a new report up, which is the first in a series that we're going to be doing, which I've sort of been thinking of as the secret history of South Bend's secret police tapes. And the basis for this story is obviously a bunch of interviews that I've been doing. I was in South Bend last month, and I spoke to some of the cops who are on the secret police tapes and who sued to block their release. Now, one of those cops is a guy named Tim Corbett. At the time, he didn't work for the South Bend Police Department. He was the commander of the county homicide unit. He has given interviews since all of this happened back in 2012. The others have largely been silent, and even Corbett gave me information that has not been public before. So there's a lot. I've spent hours talking with these guys, texting, following up, and clarifying exactly what they mean, syncing up the timelines that they're giving me, all of this stuff. And they were all talking with me on the record, and we're breaking it up chunk by chunk to focus on individual aspects of what happened leading up to the 2011 mayoral campaign in South Bend, during the campaign, and what happened afterwards, right? Remember in 2012, Buttigieg demotes Darryl Boykins, the city's first black police chief, because there is a federal investigation into whether the police department under Boykins, at his direction, was breaking federal law by recording officers and potentially threatening them, or allegedly threatening them with career repercussions for what was supposedly on these tapes or what they supposedly were saying. I want to emphasize, if only because they want to emphasize, that although the documents that we reported on last year, which alleged to describe what they said, contain some racist stuff. It certainly sounds racist on its face, and at a minimum, it's racially inflammatory. They deny any racist intent. They deny any racist animus towards Boykins or anyone else, but they confirm no one disputed the basic gist of what the documents said, which is that once it became clear in late 2010 and early 2011 that there was going to be a new mayor of South Bend, they began having discussions, not so much about who that ought to be, but about what that new mayor ought to do with the police department, including but not limited to who should be the chief of that police department. And one of them told me that he spoke with Buttigieg himself, which was part of the documents that we reported on back in September. He confirmed it to me, and he confirmed a lot more than that to me as well. So I want to go through some of the highlights here, because I'll confess to having a little trouble keeping straight in my head everything they've told me. And I should point out, it's supplemented by what I've heard from others, my conversations with other people. In some cases, there's documentary evidence that we've obtained. Obviously, the reports that were filed by Karen DePape, the woman who was fired for listening to the recordings and putting them on cassette tapes. We obtained access to those documents back in September. And we also, the city released to us a deposition given by Mike Schmuel, who was the chief of staff for Buttigieg back then and is now running Buttigieg's campaign. So, just in terms of the timeline, according to the documents, DePape says that in February 2011, Lieutenant Dave Wells is heard discussing a plan to remove Boykins, and the plan involves Buttigieg's donors. I spoke to Wells, and we'll get to what he said. 4 months later, according to the documents, Detective Jim J.T. Taylor spoke directly with Buttigieg and reported back that, quote, Boykins is done. I spoke to Taylor as well. So I'm going to go roughly chronologically through 2011 and sort of recap some of the highlights of what these guys told me. So Corbett was one of the sort of obvious and leading contenders for the position of chief if Buttigieg were to decide not to keep Boykins on. He'd been around for decades. He knew a lot of people, and a lot of people knew him. So we'll get to him. So Wells tells me, yeah, quote, Corbett was gunning for that job. Corbett puts it slightly differently. He says, because he's so well known, quote, and he did say, I didn't include it in the article, but he said he's not patting himself on the back. He says, quote, your name is going to become involved. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm reaching out and begging anybody or anything like that, but people put your name in the hat. So I asked him, well, who were you talking to? He says, honestly, I got contacted by 50 to 100 people over the course of that election. And I responded, of course, well, were any of them the two donors named in the documents as having been spoken to by you about the chief's position? I asked him specifically by name, did you speak to these guys? He said, those are questions you'd have to ask them direct, but I would say yes. And I don't think he was intending to be evasive. My guess is that having spoken to him several times, numerous times over the past month or so, he's a fairly voluble guy, and he's not big on filters. And my guess is he spouts off pretty easily to whoever happens to be in spouting off distance. So to me, it is conceivable that he literally does not recall specifically whether he spoke to either of those two guys. Now, the two guys in question, we've reported this before, were Bob Urbanski, who was the campaign chairman of Buttigieg's campaign, his biggest donor, and he was the owner of the office space that Buttigieg was using as campaign headquarters. So if anyone had his ear, it was Bob Urbanski. The other donor was Sam Hensley, much lower scale in terms of donations. But I asked both of them last year, so what about this? Were you guys involved in conversations like this? Hensley told me flat out no. And I said, what about fundraisers? Were you involved in any fundraisers? He said, nope, I was not involved in any fundraisers. I then told him I had a copy of an invitation, a flyer for one fundraiser that listed him as a co-host. And I asked whether I could send it to him and get any comment from him after that. And I emailed it to him and haven't heard back. Urbanski hung up on me last year when I asked him about this. And when I tried him again this year, now that I've spoken to the cops directly, and one of them told me to ask Urbanski directly, Urbanski told me he was not interested in talking about this and hung up on me again. So I'm batting 1,000 with Bob Urbanski. So I want to talk a little bit about what the substance was that they were saying about Chief Boykins. And again, I want to emphasize that to a person, first of all, they're not all of them are indicated or implicated in some way on the tapes as having said something racist, period, let alone about Boykins. Some are, and we'll get to those. But Corbett is not shy about the fact that he thinks Boykins is a perfectly fine person, nice enough fellow, but not, in Corbett's eyes, I think it's fair to say, the person he wanted to see as chief of the department. So I'm going to read a little bit from my own report here. Asked about one account in the documents that he, Corbett, mocked Boykins as saying, duh. Corbett says he doesn't recall it. And again, keep in mind, this stuff was 9 years ago. They don't know what's on these tapes. So it's not implausible that they don't recall it. However, a lot of the things that they don't recall, if it feels like they're weaseling out, they also say to me, I can't tell you I didn't say it. So it's not the obvious clear-cut evasion of responsibility or accountability that it might seem at first blush. They're essentially saying, you know, maybe it's going to turn out that I did say that. And I talked to some of them about what that would mean if some of these things are on there, and we'll get to that. So Corbett says he doesn't recall mocking Boykins as saying, duh, but Corbett adds that at one point later on in the year, he and Buttigieg discussed Boykins' strategic planning. And Corbett tells me that he told Buttigieg, quote, Boykins can't even spell strategic planning. And then he says, that came out of my mouth. Corbett told me that. Now we get to some of the racial issues here. According to the documents, on June 3rd, 2011, Lieutenant Wells is recorded saying, quote, Tim, that's Corbett, Tim says it is going to be a fun time when all white people are in charge. I asked Corbett about that quote, and he said he did not say that, and the words he used I can't say on YouTube, but that's BS. That's BS. I asked Wells, do you remember Tim Corbett saying that to you? Do you remember saying that Corbett said that to you? Wells said he didn't remember either of those things. And then he said about Corbett, he's got black kids, so he's not this racist that the community, a certain segment, make him out to be. And I pressed Wells a bit. And, you know, I've tried to explain to people that, you know, we did a report back in April of last year on racism within the department. It's obviously a meaningful subject. It's newsworthy. It's worth covering, even by a national outlet. But my emphasis at this moment is not on every specific racist thing that may have been said by cops in South Bend. It's about what was Buttigieg doing, saying, hearing, and what did he do about it. But I pressed Wells on this one. I asked him, what will you say if the tapes come out and there you are saying that? What are you going to say at that point? And Wells told me, quote, I would like to hear the context around it, you know? I'm not excusing it. It's certainly a terrible thing to say, but was it just kind of one of those BSing, joking kind of things or something? I don't know, but I don't remember that at all, and I'd tell you. I also asked Wells about Corbett's discussions with Buttigieg's donors. In other words, I asked Wells, what was Corbett telling you? What were you hearing from Corbett about Boykins? And Wells tells me, quote, Corbett may have told them this guy's an idiot, meaning Boykins is an idiot, he needs to go. Corbett may have told them this guy's an idiot, he needs to go. But he told everybody that, which again goes to why maybe he doesn't remember specifically. This is someone who knew a lot of people and was telling a lot of people, the chief is not good, he needs to go. And one thing I want to emphasize is that this is the kind of conversation that happens anytime there's a new mayor in any town, in every department, right? And the reason it's taken on, I think, this kind of shroud of secrecy and sinister aspect is one, obviously, clearly, because of concerns that there's racial motives here at work, which are not helped at all by the existence of apparently racist rhetoric in some of these instances. But the other thing that has kind of shrouded this in mystery and made it look sinister is the fact that Buttigieg has never been open about the fact that these conversations took place. These are natural, normal conversations that any incoming mayor should be having. Do I have the best people in place? No? Why not? Yes? Why? Who are the alternatives I should be looking at? Are there better people out there? What makes them better? In what ways are they worse? What are the challenges? What are the perils of making that replacement? These are conversations that of course you should be having. For whatever reason, Buttigieg has not been forthcoming about what those conversations were, let alone what he was thinking during those conversations. Now, another angle that I pursued during this was at a time when you've got three frontrunners in the Democratic Party trying to get the nomination, they're going to be inclined, right, to make people around them happy by making promises that those people want to hear. One of the other candidates was a guy named Mike Hammond, who spoke to me before, but would not speak to me on this one. Corbett told me that there were veiled sources who were kind of pushing his name on Mike Hammond back in the spring of 2011, or even winter of 2011, pushing Corbett as a potential chief for South Bend to replace, obviously, Chief Boykins. Now, as I mentioned, Hammond wouldn't talk to me, but I did talk to an insider, a political insider from South Bend, who told me that at the time some cops were, quote, angling to get Corbett the job with Hammond. In other words, well, I'll read you the direct quote. This is from the insider. Quote, Corbett wanted to be police chief. Hammond felt he needed to get out in front of it. He felt enough pressure. In other words, he was feeling pressure to agree to make Corbett chief. He felt enough pressure that he needed to make it really clear, this is where I'm at. And then he actually makes a public statement. I'm not going to commit to any personnel changes. In other words, apparently, he's trying to nip that in the bud. Like, get off my back. I'm not handing out jobs at the moment. Taylor, another officer who was actually president of the local Fraternal Order of Police, which is essentially the union, confirmed to me that at a candidates forum that the union held, Mike Hammond did in fact say, I'm not going to commit to any personnel changes. Taylor also told me, quote, I don't think Pete did, meaning he doesn't recall Buttigieg refusing to commit to personnel changes. The Buttigieg campaign did not respond to my questions or my request for comment, so they haven't weighed in on whether or not Buttigieg felt any pressure to put Corbett in as chief, whether he felt any pressure to take Boykins out as chief, let alone what he thought about it or how he responded. So we just don't know at this point. So let's talk a little bit about Taylor. When I originally saw Taylor's name in the documents, I was surprised because he didn't seem as high-ranking as some of the other people and who did not have access to Buttigieg. And when I found out that he was president of the FOP at the time, I thought, oh, well, of course, he's president of the FOP. That's why Buttigieg is talking to him. According to Taylor, that's not why Buttigieg was talking to him. Taylor and Buttigieg used to go to the same gym, and they would see each other pretty much every morning. So I'm going to read you some of what Taylor said to me about their friendship. Quote, I'd see him pretty much on an every morning basis, and that's how I got to know him. Taylor says they first began talking in 2008 or 2009. Quote, he'd occasionally come up to me and say, you know, how's the police department going? And things like that. He'd ask you if you could change something, what would you change? Not knowing that, okay, hey, I'm going to be running for mayor and I'm taking notes, you know. Now, Taylor was South Bend Police, but he was also tasked to the county homicide unit, working with Wells, the guy I mentioned before. Taylor, unlike Wells, had pretty decent view of the police department at the time. Taylor tells me about his conversations with Buttigieg regarding the police department. Quote, I would always first talk about the pros, the positives, you know. He said there was good morale and he had no issues with Boykins. Quote, we were doing great things. But Taylor was also talking about how well the homicide unit was doing. Corbett ran the homicide unit. And according to Taylor, under Corbett, the homicide unit had only one acquittal in 12 years and an 80% solvability rate. Quote, we had such incredible teamwork and leadership, and at the time you had Tim Corbett. I'd sit there and talk to Pete about this is how the whole damn place should run, meaning the homicide unit, which Corbett ran. It happened, you know, 1 or 2 times a week. That's how often Taylor and Buttigieg were talking about this stuff. So, in June 2011, this is now after Buttigieg has won the primary, Taylor is quoted in the documents saying that he spoke with Buttigieg and that, quote, Boykins is done, indicating that Buttigieg has decided he will not keep Boykins on. I asked Taylor, do you remember that? Do you remember Buttigieg saying Boykins is done? Taylor does not remember that. He did tell me, quote, before the general election, I can remember telling Buttigieg at the gym one time when he asked me who the chief should be, and I said, well, if you're going to become the mayor, then I told him Steve Richmond should be the chief of police. The following month, July 2011, Buttigieg was, quote, open to Richmond, Taylor tells me. Quote, it was literally, I'm open to making changes. If you had your choice, who would you make the chief? He literally asked me, and I told him this is who I thought it should be. Buttigieg then asks him why. Quote, I gave him all the positives about Richmond. Yes, Steve was my partner at one point in time, but Steve taught me how to basically be a detective. And Taylor went into some detail with me about Richmond's strengths as a detective. Another point I want to make here, and then I'll wrap it up and look at what you folks have to say in the chat, is that in his book, Buttigieg writes about problems in the police department when he became mayor. In other words, problems that were already there at the time that he took office, and Boykins had been chief since 2011. He criticizes the lack of a system for promotions or evaluations. He doesn't say in the book, where did he get that assessment from? He's not a police officer. He's not a former police officer. So it's not clear why he thinks the police department is deficient in that respect. I asked Corbett, essentially, what did you think? Was that an assessment that you shared? I'm trying to figure out, is it possible that Corbett was talking about this stuff and it made its way to Buttigieg? Corbett says he doesn't know whether Buttigieg got that critique from him directly or through the donors, Urbanski and Hensley. Now I'm quoting Corbett, quote, "I've been very vocal about that over the years, so anybody that has a couple of ears or can read, they know exactly my feeling on that. I have made it well known my feelings on promotions and demotions and the way I think that they need to be done. And I don't think my evaluation or my feelings would have not been made available to him in one way or another." So then I asked him specifically, I shouldn't say then, at some point I asked Corbett specifically, did you try to get Urbanski or Hensley to get Buttigieg to remove Boykins? And Corbett gave me what I'll describe as an emphatic response, which I won't do justice to because he has a very particularly strong speaking style. So you'll have to forgive me if I don't do justice to it. Quote, "I don't know where this stuff comes from, that Urbanski or Hensley or Corbett have all this kind of pull. We can just start making phone calls and go, hey, Petey boy, this dude's out of here, this guy's in." And regarding specifically whether he pushed for Boykins to be removed, Corbett said, quote, "That's all BS. Whoever is saying it is a liar, and I will go on record they're a liar. That doesn't happen. You're not going to tell Pete Buttigieg anything. He's always the smartest guy in the room. He knows everything, and he's going to make up his own mind. If it was the case, like what you're trying to indicate here, meaning me, then I would have been the chief of police. Steve Richmond would be, whoever other than Darryl Boykins, but that wasn't the case." Now, on the subject of Urbanski's influence, I was told by one insider that it had happened at some point that people who wanted someone for a specific job did get Urbanski to lobby Buttigieg on behalf of that person. And in addition, we obtained an August 2017 email from Urbanski in which he tells Buttigieg, quote, "Laura O'Sullivan is an outstanding person who would do an excellent job for you. I urge you to make her your choice for your new chief of staff." Her appointment was announced 13 days later, 2 weeks later. I also wanted to know who else might he have been listening to. And so I reached out to some of the people who I thought would be obvious people. You're running for mayor, then you're the mayor-elect. Who do you reach out to? So we already reported that Buttigieg and Mike Shmuel essentially kind of ghosted. They ignored one mayoral aide, an aide to the incumbent, a guy named Lynn Coleman, who's a black man and who was also a veteran of the South Bend Police Department. So it doesn't appear that Buttigieg spoke much, if at all, to Coleman about this or anything else. And I asked two other veterans of the South Bend Police Department, two white guys, whether Buttigieg spoke to them. Now, at the time, in 2011, one of these police veterans was still on the police force, and he was president of the Common Council. This is a guy who's now an adversary, a political adversary of Buttigieg, a guy named Derek Dieter, and he said, nope, Buttigieg never talked to him about the department. I asked Pat Cottrell, who was another former police captain, if I remember the rank correctly. He was president at the time of the Board of Public Safety, which oversees the police department. Cottrell told me, nope, Buttigieg never talked to him about the police department. And then, of course, there's the question of, well, did he talk to Boykins at all? Now, we know he interviewed him for the job in December 2011, but to what extent was he hearing from Boykins? So I spoke to the current police chief. This is a guy who was appointed by Buttigieg and is still in the position. This is Chief Scott Ruskowski. He told me that he and Boykins had been friends for years and that he supported Boykins' initial appointment as chief in 2007. Ruskowski says Boykins himself would not have lobbied Buttigieg on his own behalf during the 2011 campaign. Quote, "I could never see him having to ask what's going to happen with him," Ruskowski said. because he's never been that type of guy. And that's a good chunk of what I'm reporting today. Again, this is a series, so we're not done. These guys had a lot more to tell me, and it kind of opens up some new territory in what's coming, which I'm going to be working on in the next few days. But in the meantime, if you're new to TYT Investigates, our YouTube channel here, thank you so much. I hope you're subscribing. And the reason we do this live every day, or at least most days, is so that I can get your feedback. I enjoy it, and it helps me as a journalist to see what you're saying. So I'm going to dive into the chat and take some of your questions, respond to some of your comments, and share the good stuff. I will ask, it's a little too late, the fact that we're doing reporting on Pete Buttigieg, I would ask you not to consider that an invitation to come here and insult the man, let alone engage in, you know, ad hominem attacks. That's not what we do here. And play nice, play nice. Okay. Let's see what you have to say. I'm going to skip you guys talking about the debate. Sorry. There may not be anything except you guys talking about the debate. Kalita says it's funny because he sounds so sweet, but I bet John is pretty tenacious. I think you're talking about me there. It's funny because someone else today posted on Twitter, posted this story and said Jonathan Larsen has been working on this for a long time, and I sort of felt like it's, you know, people do think I'm obsessed with Pete Buttigieg and stuff like that, but like this story, I should have had this a long time ago. So mostly I just kick myself that it's taken me this long. I'm not sure if I'm tenacious so much as just slow or dense. Okay, let's see what else you have to say. Truth for Trumpists has an ad hominem attack. Come on, we're better than that, people. Aqua Amana says, I love that TYT journalists are continually following up on this important story. Well, we can only do that because you guys support us doing it. So thank you for that. It means a lot and it makes this possible. Imperator One says, I feel a little bad we're not talking about the story. Sorry, JL. It's quite all right. That's the perils of starting from the beginning, right? You guys have time before I start even talking to chat with yourselves. So. Kalita says, great stuff though, John. Thank you. Let's see what else here. Imperator One says, I worry that even with this great reporting, Pete isn't really feeling the heat for any of this. He's dodged a lot of it on the debate and national stages. I will say, I think that's largely true. But I also think that Vice, Antonia Hilton, I hope I'm getting her name correctly, she did, I thought, a really good job pressing Pete Buttigieg on the story that I reported with Mike Hammond of The Root about Pete's response to black police officers who asked for his help and were basically ignored. And his response was, I thought, kind of shocking. At least one of the officers certainly was involved in a disciplinary issue, but the vast majority were not. The vast majority of them were people who held rank within the department, who had been there for years and had, as far as I'm aware, no blemishes on their record. But Buttigieg essentially suggested that because there were disciplinary issues, he didn't want to get involved in the process and ask them to respect the process. And of course, the substance of their complaint was the process is screwed up. Please fix the process. So to one imply that every single cop who reached out to him was a disciplinary issue in some way or was facing some kind of procedural, punishment is hugely problematic, to say the least. But also to suggest that complaints about the process are going to be met with a request that you respect the process is crazy making, I think. But generally, and Hilton, to her credit, she called him on it and was clearly not happy with what he said in response. Kalita says, Pete keeps saying that he didn't listen to the tapes, yet he made a decision based on what people told him about the tapes. I did mention this is a series, right? So stay tuned. Good tease, Kalita. Thank you for the help. Sarah says, are the tapes being released, or are we just going to be tortured with not knowing what actually happened? So the tapes are not being released. The tapes are right now still being disputed in court, and the cops will tell you, whether or not you ask, they will tell you that it was not legal to tape a line that neither party had consented to. And so they, as far as I can tell, genuinely believe that constitutional issues, privacy issues are genuinely at stake here. And I heard some off-the-record things about personal stuff that was discussed on it, on those lines. That's heartbreaking. And you could understand why people would be outraged at the thought of that being released to the public and having people listen to it and having the audio out there. So it's hard to begrudge them that. That said, there is absolutely material on that there is a genuine public interest in. Now, most recently in this court fight, a judge said that the call that was recorded on February 4th, 2011, if I have that right, is fair game. The reasoning behind why the other stuff is not is hugely convoluted as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge. But in any case, even the February 4th call, which is the first time we hear about this quote-unquote plan to get rid of Boykins, even that one, the judge said, yes, this can be listened to, just not yet, because we still have some more fighting to do about that. So when that's going to happen, we don't know. And there is a federal lawsuit regarding the shooting death by South Bend Police of Eric Logan last summer, Father's Day. And that federal suit includes an attempt to seek the tapes because they are alleging what is called a Monell pattern, a long-standing institutional pattern of either overt racism or turning a blind eye towards, e.g., incentivizing racism in the department. So they're essentially throwing out the fishing nets to see anything they can get. So it's possible that that'll come up in their trawling efforts. But I think the likelihood of seeing anything before the nomination is decided is incredibly slim. Imperator 1 says, I thought Buttigieg had listened to the tapes with his counsel. There is no evidence that Buttigieg listened to them, and he has said publicly that he has not listened to them. Where it gets a little sketchy is he has said publicly that I don't know if you can legally even ask what's on them. But in 2013, his lawyers did exactly that. They asked multiple questions. We reported this back in September. They asked multiple questions secretly of the woman who heard the recordings and then transferred them onto tape. And then his lawyers got answers. And there is no legal principle that says he can't ask, but his lawyers can, and his lawyers can read the answers, but he can't. Just does not exist. That's a firewall that the campaign now says he was trying to observe, but it's not a legal firewall. There's no such legal principle that says, yes, you need to stay on that side and you on the other, that's all good. Does not exist. Curious Cleo says it's starting to get a bit more attention here and there. If Pete surges again, maybe it will be noticed more and JL's work be appreciated. Imperator 1 says the latter probably. Oh, sorry. Didn't JL say that the city was going to drop their suit? So it's not the city per se that's suing to get the tapes released. It's the council, the Common Council, which is the legislative body of the city. And yes, because of our reporting, because we revealed a lot of stuff that was on the tapes, or at least in the documents about the tapes, the Common Council at least considered the possibility that they no longer needed to hear the tapes themselves. They could rely solely on what was in the documents. Now, they ended up not doing that, but as far as I'm aware, they've also done nothing about what was revealed in the documents. So it's a little unclear to me exactly what the council's position is towards the tapes. If they just want to get them out and then take no action, that's valid, I suppose. You can say, well, we'll wait and see what the populace has to say about these tapes before we decide how to act. I suppose that's a defendable position. But there's another possibility, which is the council does take some action. And if you're going to take some action, not necessarily punish individuals, but identify systemic problems, maybe about the transition, maybe about the phone lines, maybe about promotions, whatever it might be. There are a number of different things you could envision a legislature doing. They've done none of them. They've also, as far as I'm aware, done no independent investigation. They've done nothing to find out for themselves what's on these tapes. By that I mean, there was nothing stopping them in March of 2012 from going to each and every one of these cops and saying, what are you guys talking about? There was nothing stopping them from going to DePape, the woman who made the tapes, and saying, what did you hear? So, again, before all the judicial orders came down. So it's not exactly clear what, and it's not a monolithic body, right? It's a bunch of different people with different agendas and different priorities. So it's hard to talk about what the council wants. There's seven people on the council. The council doesn't want anything. There are seven wants on that council. Aqua Amana says, this reporting is not just about Pete, but also reforming the South Bend Police. Well, Cenk's point, thank you for that, Aqua, but Cenk's point often about this is that a lot of the stuff that we're looking at here is not especially unique to South Bend. And, part of it, I would venture, comes from the fact that it is a small city and you don't always get systems in place that can anticipate and head off every possible problem, such as the ones that appear to have come here. Khalida just yelled at you guys, get off my back. I don't know what you guys did, but get off Khalida's back. Jira Brown says, I hope the tapes are released, but I don't know if Pete will continue long after Super Tuesday. Well, one thing to keep in mind is this guy keeps surprising people time after time. And I had someone who is close to Pete and is a big fan of Pete's tell me back in April, basically, you watch. And he hasn't been wrong so far. Imperator 1 says, refusing to respond to requests for comment always sounds so sinister, LOL. I actually believe, I'm not going to share my theories because most of my theories turn out to be wrong, which is great because pursuing them leads me to other stuff. But my guess is that if Buttigieg had been much more upfront about a lot more from jump, then a lot of things would have been very different. That's my guess. Curious Cleo says, whether ignorance, inexperience, or ill intentions, Pete needs to answer for all of this. Truth for Trumpists says, this is such a huge deal, it really should have sunk him already. The establishment is strong in this one. The amount of voter fraud, in my opinion, plus obvious fact, that went on at Iowa was staggering. Lance A., I'm not sure what you're talking about when you say what a waste of an official job. Okay, I think I'm going to... Khalida asks me whether I read the article in Current Affairs about Buttigieg in his book. I did read that. I haven't read the book. I've read the sections pertinent to the reporting I've been doing. Michael Marley says, is Corbett's talk sour grapes over losing the sheriff's race? He switched parties to run as an R for county commissioner. So yeah, in 2018, Corbett ran for county sheriff and lost narrowly. Now, Michael, I'm guessing you're from the area, so you have some knowledge about this, but I'm not sure what I said or what Corbett said to me that you're interpreting as sour grapes. I'm trying to remember. Oh, he ran against Steve Redman, I believe is the guy's name, but I'm not sure that I heard anything in what Corbett said to me that I would call sour grapes. But I might just not be sufficiently familiar with the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics out there in St. Joe County to be knowledgeable about it. So if you've got more specifics on how that would make sense, Michael, I'd be curious to hear that. Thank you for chiming in. All right, you guys are fighting the delegate battle for the DNC. All right, so I'm going to thank you guys for your time. If you're new to TYT Investigates, I really appreciate you coming to check out what we do. As you may have noticed, it's a little bit different from the rest of the Young Turks. I'm a lot less polished. I'm not a TV star. I don't have a script, and this is my home. So I'm a lot less polished. I also don't do, political endorsements and stuff like that. We do commentary here. We talk about original reporting by ourselves and others. Sometimes we do political commentary, but it usually tends to be along the lines of, here's how we might want to think about this, or here's some information you might want to know. It's very rarely telling you, here's who you should support, and here's which bill you should back, that kind of thing. So thank you for checking us out. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll let other people know about what we do. And tomorrow, I'm hoping to have a repeat special guest. Tomorrow is Media Analysis Fridays. Some serious clickbait there, right? Who doesn't love media analysis? My hope and plan is that we're going to talk a little bit about how this story came to be. So I hope you'll join us for that. And then in the coming days, I hope to roll out the next parts of this series. So I hope you'll follow me on Twitter at JT Larsen. And also the unit is at TYT Investigates on Twitter. So follow us, check us out on Facebook, all that good stuff. And follow along with our reporting. And I hope you'll join us back here when we're live here at TYTI Daily. In the meantime, as the longtime viewers know, I would like you to take care of each other and take care of yourselves. And we'll see you soon.